Hello and welcome. We're at the end of 2020, a horrendous year for the world and India. But today, as we head into 2021, what are the major lessons we have learned from this pandemic? What are the challenges that still lie ahead and also the opportunities? Are we on the brink of momentous changes, looking ahead to the future? Or do we face the danger of stagnating or spiraling backwards in conflict and division? Joining me on the dialogues are two people with very different perspectives on the India of today and tomorrow. I'm joined by Yogendra Yadav and Chetan Bhagat. First, a question for both of you. As you look ahead to 2021, what do you see as the India of 2021, the India of tomorrow? What have we learned from this pandemic and what do we need to capitalize on these learnings for as we go into the new year? Yogendra Yadav, why don't you start?
Thanks, Sonia. I speak as I sit in a tent at Shahjahanpur where farmers are protesting on the border. This is a makeshift tent in bitter cold outside. And that probably is a good vantage point to talk about 2021. The one thing that I would like to look forward to in 2021 is that minimally, we don't see what we witnessed with the migrant labor in this country in 2020. We don't see what we witnessed happening to the farmers in 2020. That we have as a country, we move forward. As a country, the last person moves forward. When I say we move forward, for me, as Mahatma Gandhi said, the progress of the country must be measured by how the last person features. So in 2021, one should hope that the last person moves forward. That for me would be a measure of what happens in 2021. The signs are not too good. As a country, there are attempts to divide, there are attempts to create conflicts. Can we overcome that? Can we move forward? That would be something that I would really hope and look forward to.
No, and I think really brings out, as you said, you're sitting in a tent, a vantage point as you look ahead at 2021. Chetan Bhagat, you're writing on Indian issues and you've seen this much more as 2020 seeing a lot more resistance to change. What would you say when you look at Yogendra Yadav's vision for 2021? Because I think this point is important that we saw even in this pandemic, the rich did get richer. The richest of the lot seemed to get more foreign direct investment. Businessmen in a certain elite category did very well. But the poor, as we've seen with the new hunger report as well, are getting poorer. But somehow it's a problem middle class or English-speaking India doesn't want to look at.
I'm an optimistic person. I think Yogendraji is talking about a very specific issue. He's in the middle of the protest, literally. So, and that I with all respect to people who are protesting there, and it's very cold, and I think there's a lot of suffering involved in this protest. But I think your question is more broad about 2021, and I am an optimistic person. I think we are looking at a boom scenario for Indian economy. I've been the first to criticize it many times on your show. Also, I've criticized the way it's being handled. Changes are not being done enough. And 2020 was a terrible year. I mean, the GDP contracts as much as it did, there will be suffering. It's not just a number. It's not just something economists discuss in their drawing rooms. It will hit Main Street. It will lead to loss of jobs, and it has led to that all over the world. But India is a particularly poor country, so we will suffer a lot. But 2021, I think, will be a boom year because vaccinations are underway all over the world. India will start soon. They'll be slow at first, but I think within 3 to 6 months, there'll be a lot of vaccinations done. Corona, luckily, we don't understand the disease, but India has not seen as many deaths, even if the cases are underreported or whatever. We haven't seen as many deaths as, let's say what's happening in the US or Europe. We are very lucky. Maybe we have a little more immunity. I don't know what the reason is. I hope there is no next wave coming here. So I think we are on the way to having a bounce back. We will need more stimulus. I think the stimulus efforts done so far are not enough. We need to do more. We need to put money in the hands of people. And as far as even the farmer laws are concerned, listen, we've grown up hearing that Indian farmer is suffering. They never get their due. They are always poor. There are farmer suicides. They they make 1/3 the per capita GDP of 15-20% of GDP agriculture makes, employing 60% of people. So even by Indian standards, they make 1/3 of what an average Indian makes. By global standards, it's even lower. So some change is needed for sure. And I think change is difficult, and change will have different stakeholders, will have different takes on it. And that's almost a separate NDTV dialogues you can have for it. But on a 2021, I think we are poised for a very good recovery. If we do this right, if we stay focused, if we do a little more stimulus and the vaccinations come through, which they will, I think we'll see a very good year for India.
I want to ask Yogendra Yadav, because again, when you look ahead at 2021, there are often people who are called constant critics, or people who will oppose for the sake of opposition. I mean, the political opposition is often called that by the government, and also people like yourself. So in that sense, if you're looking at Corona, for instance, India, as compared to the rest of the world, seems currently to be in a better situation, even in terms of a vaccine rollout. Again, we seem to be preparing, modeling it to our general election structure, where in fact India often shows the world how to do elections. We're looking at vaccinations in the same model. So in that sense, I mean, when we look at the Indian farmer, leaving aside perhaps just the specifics of this, the points that unions and you have asked for in these laws, the point is that there needs to be change, there needs to be improvement, and perhaps the Prime Minister looked at this pandemic at a time that he could push through reforms, which otherwise would get stuck in a cycle of constant opposition. Do you believe that on a larger scale there is some merit to the argument that this is the time for change? We need to change or we will keep stagnating.
Indeed, this is the time for change. Indeed, farming, agriculture, even agriculture marketing needs fundamental changes. The real question is whether these are the changes that we needed. And this entire talk of let's have change, let's do something, here is something, let's support it. I mean, that's a very bad argument. We must ask, is this the something that we needed to do? And on that, this one doesn't stand. In any case, I think the elementary logic in what is being suggested, look, something needed to be done, and it had to be pushed in at a dark time from the back door, because otherwise it would meet resistance. So are we saying something needs to be foisted on the farmers against their will, without their knowledge, otherwise they would resist? That sounds like a very bad argument to me, apart from being undemocratic to the core. But in the larger question, let's not get stuck only on these three farm laws, because we are looking at the larger picture. I share a sense of optimism that Chetan has. I think our differences may be not about optimism, our differences may be in where exactly do we see engines of that positivity, and what would be the measures of the success of positivity. To me, the measures of success will be, as I said, in how the last person fares. I do not measure, for example, agriculture by figures of agricultural growth. I would measure it by well-being of the farmers. Similarly, I would not merely look at the GDP growth figures. I would look at how the last person fares. We must not forget that this year we saw two reports, very damning reports. We have the Family Health Survey, which has come out with indicators of nutrition, which should put every Indian to shame. Things have actually got worse than before. We have the survey on education, school education in rural India, which shows that this year has been a very bad year in terms of education for the poor children in rural India because of disruption of classes, that actually there has been a roll back in the quality of learning. For me, improvement in these would be indicators that I would judge the economy and well-being of the country from. Having talked about economy, and I'm sure we'll come back to that in the course of the discussion, let's not forget the other two big indicators, quality of democracy and the content of diversity in this country, both of which are under very, very severe challenge. And one would hope that these two improve in the course of this year.
In fact, Chetan Bhagat, I want to ask you on that, because writers like yourselves, or people who in a sense reach out, have a vast audience of young people, why is it that there is a large segment of India which seems almost invisible? And you know, I notice this also when we have discussions, that somehow people want to say that we don't want to hear about this hunger, we don't want to hear about the fact that digital education isn't about online classes, but the number of children who can't afford even a simple cell phone to do those classes. So again, we seem to be back in this dichotomy that we heard of years ago with India Shining, where we still believe that somehow that it undercuts India, or you're less of a patriot if you admit that there are problems that a large segment of fellow Indians are facing?
Listen, I mean, there are problems. And if you ask me personally, I would rather have the economy grow a lot faster, a lot of changes happen. But I think as a writer who observes India, what I see is there is a certain contentment. I mean, our per capita incomes have risen from the late 1980s, 90s of $300 per person to 2,000, which means Indians are not abject poverty is not there as much. Even when you saw the migrant labor walk, they were wearing proper clothes and they had I'm not saying they were not suffering, but people are not of course, there is still hunger, but the levels are much lower than before. So this is not just a case of a government doing it. It's a very popular government doing it. We keep forgetting when we call it undemocratic, when we call it's not even a case like the Commonwealth Games scam when the Congress government had become unpopular. And Yogendra Ji himself was at the forefront of those protests. And even they were doing, they were an elected government and they decided what laws to pass and what did. And they were protests. So, but that time there was a lot of unpopularity that government faced. This government is popular. They won twice, better the next time, and all surveys show that they're very popular. So people are not. Can you imagine for example, even in the farmer bills, if it is so bad for farmers, which are 60% of the population is getting employed there, why would the government take such a suicide pill? Yes, a section may be unhappy, but everybody would agree that the BJP knows how to win elections and they have very good political sense. Even their critics would agree. So why would they do it? Because they do, I think deep down, they know there is support for this. They know that they'll be able to get past it. Or maybe they know that there is no opposition. Maybe that's also a
So you're saying why would any elected government take a suicidal step of actually angering major chunk of the vote bank? But I just one point I want to contest.
I think the vote bank is happy. People are happy.
No, so I just want to contest what you said, because of course what Yogendra Yadav is quoting are government surveys themselves, which show that the levels of nutrition are getting worse, that it actually is a question of the children dropping out of school. So these are government reports he's citing. But I do want to ask Yogendra Yadav on that every time we are in a democracy, even though some may think it's too much democracy, but the fact is at the end of the day, in a sense, voters are also voting for a government's policy. So when, say, whether farm laws, of course, is now, but for Bihar, even after the migrant exodus from our cities, Bihar did vote for the BJP. They may not have voted for Nitish Kumar, but the BJP emerged as the single largest party. And even now, as we talk of farm laws, and there may well be a great level of support for it, policies like demonetization got a political mandate. So that, what more does an elected government need? That is democratic.
Sonia, my disagreement with Chetan is not on the empirics. I think I would agree with him. Mr. Modi was popular in 2019. He won it with popularity, not with any of the sleight of hand that people say he did. He continues to be popular, at least till Bihar, we can say that. What happens after the farmers' protest is a different matter, but he has been popular. But I think Chetan tends to think that once you see that a government is popular, you don't need to examine anything else. So popularity is equal to democratic. That, Chetan, is never the case. Mr. Putin has been popular in Russia. Russia has virtually no democracy. Mr. Erdogan was popular, has been popular in Turkey. Democracy has been destroyed in that country. Mrs. Indira Gandhi was popular when she imposed emergency. She had a massive mandate in 1971 through that. And if popularity alone was the measure of everything being nice in a country, then we would have to conclude that for the first 30, 40 years, India lived in a wonderful state. Everything must have been nice about the country because all the governments were popular. So I think it's a fundamental mistake to reduce the quality of democracy only to the popularity. Popularity is one necessary component of democracy. It is not sufficient. And especially for writers, for media, for those who reflect, for activists, it is absolutely vital that we attend to things other than elections in a democracy. The content and quality of democracy is measured not by vote or alone. I have counted votes all my life, and I can say for sure that number of votes do not tell you about quality of democracy. And that's not only about India, throughout the world. And that's a basic confusion that we must not get into.
Finally, on the one hand, of course, while we look at, say, progress, Chetan, and you've talked also, and many analysts, about the need for change, and this, in fact, previous governments as well, who are now in the opposition, about the need for change, the need for opening up. On the one hand, we look at how India must open up, agriculture must open up, but on the other hand, in 2021, we're also seeing an India where we seem to be closing up, where we're seeing these crazy love jihad laws, where we're seeing people arrested for having walking home with a girl with a birthday party. How do you reconcile these two Indias of the future? When you look at the India of the future, how can we have a situation where we are policed, whether on what we eat, on what we, who we marry, who we love, on basis of religion? Is that something you hope will end in 2021 or maybe tamper down? I can only see it actually ramping up right now. State after state passes laws and ordinances for this.
See, I agree that popularity doesn't mean perfection, and popularity doesn't mean there is no problem, or popularity does not mean that every decision is justified and correct. Absolutely not. Even if 99.9% of people agree on something, but the principles of natural justice or something unfair is happening as far as human rights are concerned, I think that's not right. But my only contention was saying that this is undemocratic. It is democratic. And that's what democracy is. It is about the popular guy getting to decide things. That's the definition. Now, the question is, are those decisions good decisions or not? And are those decisions going to be... That farm laws are complex. And it is a case of, there is a scenario in which the farmer could be it could face some abuse from the private players, right? But there is also a scenario where he could really prosper. I don't know, right? In the current scenario also of the MSP system and the Mandi system, there is a scenario where the farmer gets caught up in loans that they can't repay and gets into an endless debt trap and maybe kills himself. And there is a scenario that he gets security of MSP. What the mistake people are making, I feel, are they're comparing the best case of today, which is the farmer is happy, he gets a good MSP, makes good money and returns, with the worst case of the change. And we do this in life all the time. We love the status, we want change, but we overhype the status quo and we underhype the change. Right. I can't answer that. If you say, what if the private guy really messes or screws up the farmer's life? I can't answer that. What if the private capital?
You're not meant to be answering that either, I guess. I know that point. But the last point I was asking was about an India of the future. You can't have change in economy and opening up, and you can't have close and actually building walls between communities on the other.
To say that this decision is good or not, time will tell. I personally believe we need change in agriculture. There is no way. How can Swiss cheese and French cheese be so expensive and have such a brand name, whereas India has the biggest dairy industry and we haven't been able to brand our cheese around the world, right? And it can be worth billions, just that one industry of cheese, if we get focused on it. So, that's to that point, and to say, no, but private guys are bad, every farmer should sell everything to a mandi. I mean, that's not how private capital will come to agriculture. Okay. So even the first thing is, it is democratic. Now, is democracy always right? Maybe not. In this case, time will tell. But a fear has no answer. There may well be some people will suffer due to the change. Of course. So,
Chetan, just the other part of the question I asked you as well. You're voting for the opening up in agriculture, but why are we closing down and building walls with love jihad laws? I mean, what is love jihad?
I do not support. I would never support a policy like that. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's extreme overreaction. I think it's playing to a certain base of the BJP, which votes for the BJP for precisely these reasons. They never watched NDTV Dialogues. They are not interested in the economy or what Yogendra ji and Chetan has to say. They are interested in a certain agenda, which is ideologically about identity and religion. And I think from time to time, the BJP tends to do things to support their base. And I think they're falling into a trap, frankly, because this is a slippery slope. You keep catering to the hard right, it's going to take you down. Same thing I would say to the left also. If you keep catering to the hard left of extreme left, it's not good. So catering to the extreme right is also not good for India, I feel. It may be good politically, because there is a section which enjoys this.
final thoughts with you.
There are people who like it.
No, because it's not about catering to the agenda of the BJP in a sense, because these are laws that are putting people into jails and destroying their lives. But Yogendra, final thoughts with you.
I'll not get stuck only on farm laws, except to say that I think we should give up 19th century paternalism to say, I know your interests better than you do. And minimally what we needed was a consultation that never took place. So I think let farmers also judge what is good for them. But the larger question was about diversity, which is what is being seriously compromised in our country. Not to put too fine a point on it, minorities, especially Muslims, have already been reduced to the status of a second-rate citizen. This has also happened to Kashmir, not just recently, but what we witnessed was a culmination of marginalization and actually almost reducing them to a non-citizen status. Diversity, which is at the heart of the idea of India, is under threat like never before. And not to camouflage the issues again, I think it's fair to say that the Republic of India is being dismantled in front of our eyes. All the three components, development for the last person, democracy as experienced by the last person, and diversity, all three are being dismantled. And what I would expect from 2021 is restoration of each of these. Some betterment for the last person in terms of development, well-being, in terms of education and health, and in terms of economy. Some restoration of diversity, some respect for diversity, because a democracy is not a democracy where there are permanent minorities. And finally, some beginning of democracy. And as I close my arguments, I see some slogans in the background, I hear some slogans, and it is street protest which gives me hope. Like Chetan, I'm an optimist, but my optimism comes from a different source.
Thank you both very much. As I said, as we head into 2021, remember that we headed into 2020 with protests of the CAA. It's been interesting to see that we head into 2021 with protests in the biting cold, as you point out, Yogendra. Let's see what 2021 is. Let's all be optimistic, enter into this year with great hope, and hope to see this bear into reality. Thank you very much, Chetan Bhagat, Yogendra Yadav, for joining me. Goodbye.